We start with an exclusive report from Myanmar.
The country's military has been accused of turning its guns on another ethnic group.
This time it is the Kachin people who've been fighting for self-autonomy for decades.
I'm Alex Crawford in Kachin State in northern Myanmar, and this is Hotspots. Tonight we're going to take you behind the scenes of the world's biggest and hardest-hitting stories. We get rare access to the rebel army fighting in Myanmar's forgotten war. They really believe that they're going to end up being crushed. When clashes turn to tragedy,
The guy over there has just been shot.
our team gets caught up in deadly violence in Gaza.
I mean, it's frightening and it's distressing.
And we're in Ukraine, where Stuart Ramsey reports from the crash site of downed airliner MH17.
People here say that they could see bodies dropping from the skies.
I'm in Kachin State in northeastern Myanmar. The persecution of the Rohingya Muslims in the west of the country caused shockwaves around the world, but there's a conflict raging here too. The fighting's intensified between government forces, perhaps emboldened by what happened with the Rohingya, and these Kachin rebels. Thousands of civilians have fled their homes and escaped to the jungle. My team gained rare access to travel with the rebel group fighting in this forgotten war. There appears to be ethnic cleansing that's going on. No one has really given a flying fig about what on earth is happening inside Kachin State. They really believe that they're going to end up being crushed and wiped out unless they fight. We saw up close and personal what was happening with the Rohingya. The world's attention has been so much focused on the Rohingya, they haven't noticed what's happening elsewhere in the same country. The Myanmar military and the Myanmar authorities have become almost emboldened by what's happened and how much they've got away with, that they're now turning their attention and their guns onto another ethnic group, this time in the north. And so we decided it would be a good idea to try and check that out, find out what was going on.
The Burmese military has sort of upped its bombing campaign in the Kachin State.
There appears to be this ethnic cleansing that's going on in a different part of the same country.
Though it's not on the same levels in Kachin, but the indications or the patterns are very similar.
The Kachin are a very strong rebel group with their own hierarchy and their own army. They present a quite formidable opposition to the Myanmar authorities.
It's like a separate state within a state.
They really believe that they're going to end up being crushed and wiped out unless they fight. I mean, to be honest, I didn't know much about Kachin or the Kachin people before I started covering what was happening in Myanmar. Most people don't know anything about the Kachin people. They had lived in relative peace for centuries in the northern part of Myanmar. They've been fighting this war for literally decades. No one has really given a flying fig about what on earth is going on inside Kachin State.
It's not been reported, no journalists allowed. The Burmese government does not allow journalists to go up north to the Kachin area. We decided we had to tell the story. The next step was to reach this place.
I don't want to go into too much detail about how we got in, because this will expose the people who helped us. But we were helped by a network of people who managed to get us inside the area known as Kachin State. Kachin? Kachin? Yeah, we're in Kachin.
We didn't know what to expect. We knew there was fighting going on. We didn't know the lay of the land. How far is the fighting? How close has the Burmese military come to? It is a very difficult place to access, that is for sure. Moving around is quite difficult because the Burmese military has advanced certain places. There are certain places they have gone back.
When Britain gave Myanmar their independence in the 1940s, the Kachin people were promised their independence, they were promised self-determination, promised equality, given all sorts of promises which never ever happened. The Myanmar military is actually bombing these people. They're bombing civilian areas.
This bombing campaign has become quite severe. There's been thousands of people who have been displaced.
Bombing from the air. Villages or near villages, trying to force people to move, and they have moved in their tens of thousands. Terrified people running, being carried across rivers on the backs of elephants just to get to safety, fled in terror. And some of the people that we spoke to had moved or been forced to move multiple times. Many of the families here have fled attacks more than once, jumping from camp to camp to try and find safety. They live right on top of each other, no privacy, very little facilities, very little altogether. No aid agencies are able to get there, blocked by the Myanmar authorities. We spoke to one woman who'd moved, I think she said 7 times. She spoke about the Myanmar military bombing so close. They were terrified. They just ran, and they camped by rivers. They even crossed the border into China and then were sent back by the Chinese. They're trapped in that northern part of Myanmar by the Chinese and the Indian borders. So they're really sitting ducks there. It's an incredibly beautiful country, particularly that part, because it's very mountainous. It's very wild. There's lots of jungle. It's quite hard. But I think one of the reasons why the Kachin have managed to keep hold of this territory is that it's like this. Mountainous, difficult, not much of an infrastructure. The Kachin are a mostly Christian group. I noticed a lot of them had red bandanas with religious writings on the back of their scarves, urging them to go on, and many of them appeared to have a very strong faith and belief that God was on their side.
It's all jungle lands, all hilly, all mountainous.
This trip was pretty unusual on a number of levels, not least because we went in as a very small unit and Neville and I were shooting all our own footage, a lot of the times in very, very challenging conditions. The humidity was something off the scale of anything I've ever experienced. God, everything's just a little bit sweaty. Bloody hot, and it's really sweaty.
These guys, there's not a drop of sweat on them. No, it's very humid.
I mean, poor old Neville. Is there a problem? The camera was absolutely soaked.
Yeah, it doesn't bode well. It's not something you want on such a journey.
What are you going to do then?
I think we'll just keep it shut down for the moment and just hope it revives.
And that in itself was a challenge, because we had to cope with the physical exertion of hiking with these guys who are very used to the humidity and the conditions. And then on top of that, the cameras struggling to cope.
There was always a lot of movement of the Kachin Independent Army. They're regularly patrolling. We were continuously moving around with them and were trekking for almost 7-8 hours a day. And they did that at night as well.
Can't see a thing. We'd be following the patrol and wondering where on earth they were going, and they knew exactly where they were going.
They obviously have been doing that on a very, very regular basis.
So whilst we were slipping and sliding and trying to keep up with them, they were moving really stealthily.
Worried about falling. Up. Never climb a mountain in the night.
You're looking through the night vision and you can see things sort of clearly. You still can't really see where you're walking or how you're stepping, and we spent most of the time falling. They were using just their eyes, and I suppose your eyes get accustomed, but when you're switching between the night vision and your normal eyes, it's like going from dark to bright the whole time, and your eyes can't adjust. Show off.
They would set up their camps. Within half an hour, they had everything worked out, and they would set up a kitchen, cook their food, stay the night there. We stayed the night with them in the jungle. Next morning, they were ready to move to another place.
A lot of these outposts, they're literally within a few hundred meters of a Myanmar or a Burmese outpost. They're only about 800 meters away, positioned right on the top. And that's where they mount some of these attacks. The soldiers from either side are eyeballing themselves a few hundred meters across different hilltops. They feel they're constantly in their sights. Two different armies trying to keep quite a high profile without being too provocative. They don't want to draw fire because men on the ground with guns cannot match a military that's got jets and helicopters and lots of artillery. The problem is the Myanmar government appears to have an agenda, and they want to get back control of the Kachin area. And at the moment, the Kachin army is standing in their way. Is it a battle they can win? I think it's a battle they think they can't afford to lose. And they're prepared to do absolutely everything to defend their territory, because their territory is all they've got. It's been pretty difficult to get attention on this particular issue, because no one's interested. It's just another atrocity that's going on in a little-known part of the world that no one really cares about.
Most of the public, I don't think, know about it. The problem is the politicians do know, and they're still not doing anything about it.
You're watching Hotspots. Coming up next, we're inside the Gaza Strip on the day of the deadliest clashes seen there in years. And we go to Ukraine and to the crash site of Malaysian airliner flight MH17. Welcome back to Hotspots. Let's go to Gaza now, where 50 Palestinians were killed and thousands injured in just 24 hours. The day marked the anniversary of the Nakba, also known as the Palestinian catastrophe, but it also coincided with a controversial move of the US Embassy to Jerusalem. Alex Rossi and his team found themselves in the middle of the deadliest clashes in Gaza for years.
We didn't appreciate the scale of the danger until the rounds just started coming in.
Anybody approaching the fence or trying to break through,
The guy over there has just been shot.
risks their life. They'll be shot. I think the thing that you understand very, very quickly is that people are frustrated. You can use the analogy of a powder keg about to blow. There's not much work. The economy is broken. The infrastructure within Gaza, whether it's sewage, water, electricity, is really collapsing. I mean, it's a humanitarian disaster in everything but name. To understand Gaza, you need to understand the refugee issue and the centrality of that within the Palestinian narrative. These are people who were forced out of their homes or fled during the creation of Israel in 1948. More than two-thirds of the population of more than 2 million people are refugees.
We want to return to our land.
They will often tell you and point out that they are living in the biggest open-air prison in the world. It's under blockade. Israel controls what goes in and what goes out.
They want the world to see what they have to put up with and why they wanted to go to the fence over this period of time.
Israel would argue that they withdrew unilaterally in 2005, but they still control everything that goes in by land. They can say what Gazans can have or not have. They control the airspace, and they also control the area from the sea. It's under a blockade at the moment. Now, Palestinians would say it's a form of siege. Israel argues that it is to stop Hamas. Hamas is a militant Islamist organization. Now, they have called many times in the past for the destruction of Israel, and this is why Israel justifies the blockade of Gaza. It's a place that is always on the cusp of breaking out into a kind of violent reaction with Israel at some point. So the protests that started on March the 30th, they were about reclaiming what they see as their natural rights to the land that they belong to. So when the protests started, they were to highlight what it is to be a Palestinian, to, as far as they're concerned, be incarcerated with no hope, with no opportunity, and to have been, for many years, denied what they see as their rights to their land.
I want to go to inside Palestine. This is my country. Your country, Israel.
Israel's narrative from the off has been that this has been organized by Hamas, and it's being used as a camouflage for terrorist activity. Whilst there are people protesting on the border, distracting the Israeli Defense Forces, others will be breaking through the fence and then going to the settlements, the Israeli settlements, which are dotted around the Gaza Strip. Those people will go in there to commit terrible terrorist acts. But how do you deal with that, where you have huge numbers of people butting up against the fence. Those people are mostly unarmed. They might have slingshots, they might have Molotov cocktails. How do you deal with those people, and how do you prevent a mass breach of the fence? They've dealt with it by using tear gas initially. Once you get a large number of people, live ammunition started being employed. These demonstrations are taking place at 5 locations along the Gaza Strip with the border with Israel. We're hearing the sound of Israeli snipers firing. This man, you can see here, he's just been hit in his foot. I don't know what he was doing leading up to that, but he is unarmed, and he was just picked off by an Israeli sniper. He's probably about 100 meters, 150 meters from the border fence. Guy over there has just been shot. From what we could see, aiming at people's legs, their feet, and in some cases their chests or even their heads.
We were expecting a lot of injured. I don't think anyone quite expected it to be on that scale.
Israel had made it very clear, saying anybody approaching the fence or trying to break through risks their life. They'll be shot.
I know he does. He shot his fucking foot.
People knew that there was going to be a large number of casualties and a large number of dead, and that proved to be the case.
You're exposed here.
Being in the centre of it was extremely strange. In a war zone, for instance, if people start shooting at you and you hear bullets fizzing very close to you, you get behind cover, you get down, you get out of the way. We were hoping, of course, that we were marked as press and we wouldn't be targeted ourselves, although journalists have been shot by the Israeli forces. But around you, people are dropping. It's very hard to kind of process. There's a disconnect in your mind about what exactly is happening. You'll hear the shot, and then you'll see somebody who's fallen to the floor. And then the crowd will move back slightly. And they'll all start moving forwards again to the fence. It seems so avoidable. What is it that makes these people, who are largely unarmed, do this? Why? How? Why? It's astonishing. It's just hard to process mentally.
Their resilience is amazing. We'd see a number of protesters who had been shot on previous days. Some of these kids coming back with metal splints. The fact that people will go back time and time again and protest and risk their lives, even when they've already been injured, is testament to quite how strong this sense of desperation is.
You just didn't know what was going to happen.
Just watch to the right.
So wherever you were moving, you know, all of a sudden somebody to the left or somebody to the right of you would collapse, having been shot.
It was very dangerous. I think we didn't appreciate the scale of the danger until the rounds just started coming in. We realised quite how many people were getting hit.
The protests have been going on for a number of hours. You only have to look at the fact that young Palestinian journalists were killed whilst clearly wearing equipment that identified them as press. Medics have also been shot, injured and killed as a result of helping people. Now, the Israeli claim is that they are using enough force, only enough force to protect their borders.
It was chance, really, where you were standing. Not so much who you were or what you were doing, just where you were standing at any particular moment, and that sort of decided whether you would get hit or not.
I mean, it's frightening and it's distressing.
Into the middle a bit more. Yeah. And then we'll definitely not where I was saying before.
It was important to get in the midst of it as much as possible. I think that's the only way that it's really going to sink in the viewer's mind, if you can show them those close-up pictures.
We tried to make sure that we weren't too far in with the protesters, but were somewhat to the side, so that our press markings were clear on our flak jackets. So that hopefully it was easy for the Israeli forces to identify who we were.
It does make you wonder, is it going to be you next?
The disparity with power, who has the power, is glaringly obvious. You know, Israel has one of the most modern and sophisticated armies, but on the other side, you have the Palestinians. In these protests, the inventiveness has lent itself to using kites. They've got sort of flaming rags on the back of them, and they're being sent across the border, and then they are landing in dry Israeli arable fields, and they're setting fire to them, causing, you know, millions of pounds worth of damage. It has frustrated the Israeli military, so much so that it could really be the catalyst for the next outbreaking conflict that you see between Hamas in Gaza and the Israelis. But it certainly has changed the dynamic to try and negotiate a lifting of some of the sanctions involved in the blockade.
We stopped at one of the field hospitals, and the scenes were quite horrific. I think I saw about 15 ambulances come in, each one loaded with 3, 4, 5 people, all with lower leg wounds. The triage centre was overflowing, injured body after injured body coming in. It was heartbreaking. It was heartbreaking to see quite how quickly people were getting hurt.
By the end of the day, you are attending the first funerals of people who were at the protests that you were at in the morning. You invariably are welcome. The people want the world to see what they are giving to resist their lives and what their suffering is. I think certainly the Palestinians think that these protests have been enormously successful.
This was one of very few means that they had at their disposal to say, look, we're here, we need to be heard.
People are watching Gaza again, and people are looking at what's happening there.
When you talk to some of the young lads that have lost limbs and have been shot in the leg, you know, they're back at the fence again. And that's like 2 or 3 days later. So that's what it means to them.
It's a way of negotiating with Israel. It's a way of moving the dial in a certain direction. But the danger, of course, is that what actually ends up happening is these protests will slowly but inevitably morph into something else because of that constant friction and that constant clash on the border with the Israeli forces. And then it doesn't take very long before you're entering a new phase where you're seeing rockets going out of Gaza and you're seeing Israeli warplanes bombing the Strip again.
Alex Rossi and his team on one of the deadliest days in Gaza for years. Still ahead on Hotspots, we go to Ukraine and to the crash site of Malaysian airliner flight MH17. Welcome back. You're watching Hotspots. Let's go to Ukraine and to the crash site of Malaysian airliner flight MH17. 298 people died when the plane was blown out of the sky by a missile. My colleague Stuart Ramsey was one of the first journalists on the scene.
People here say that they could see bodies literally dropping from the skies.
Huge passenger jet coming down in the middle of a war zone. That's going to be a big story.
It didn't seem like a real situation to be in at all.
I've just never seen so many dead people. It was unbelievable. I've been in Israel, would you believe, and was waiting to go into Gaza. There's been another incident this afternoon. We were doing a live shot when suddenly this news broke.
Breaking news to bring you the Reuters news agency reporting that a Malaysian passenger aeroplane has crashed in Ukraine.
Our cameraman said to me, this MH17 has crashed, it's very unlucky. And I said, that's not unlucky, that's been shot down.
It was rumoured that the plane had been shot down by a surface-to-air missile. That kind of thing doesn't happen every day.
We'll try and find out more details from the scene.
I was working in the Sky newsroom that day. I think initially we all thought, well, this must be a mistake. It can't be a passenger jet. It's a military aircraft. For so many weeks, we'd had reports of Ukrainian aircraft being shot at by pro-Russian separatists in that exact region. But as the reports continued to come in, we realised that actually it was much bigger than that. So the newsroom becomes this kind of frenetic place. People are running around trying to make sure that we're getting this story on air correctly, reporting the facts.
Hundreds of passengers are feared dead after a Malaysian Airlines jet crashed in Ukraine.
There are claims the plane may have been shot down, with both the Ukrainian government and pro-Russian separatists denying responsibility.
Our foreign desk really springs into action. The key job that they have to do is make sure we've got people on the ground.
When we got the call to go to Ukraine.
Weirdly, Ukraine and Israel have so many flights, you couldn't imagine how many flights there are. Nobody else could get to Ukraine, but we did.
We jumped on the plane that evening. 7 hours later, we were at the crash site.
They were going to have to send a big deployment, multiple teams, multiple people to go and report this story. I kind of stuck my hand up and said, look, I can go.
Right away you could see it was going to be a massive story. A huge passenger jet, a Boeing 777 coming down in the middle of a war zone. That's going to be a big story.
We navigated our own way and eventually saw some debris in the field.
I came over the hill and it was a cornfield. And at the bottom I could see wreckage burning. I said to Pete, this is still on fire. He said, it's unbelievable.
We didn't expect to get anywhere near the epicenter of the crash site. We were, I think, just mesmerized that we actually got there and then with what we were faced with. We were so fresh on the ground, less than 24 hours after the plane had come down. All the bodies were still lying there. Compared to other stories I've done of natural disasters and war zones, this was high up there.
Everywhere I looked there were bodies. I mean, just heads and arms and legs and young children and suitcases and just people. Everywhere, every step, in trees, tops of houses. It was staggering. It's absolutely staggering. I've just never seen so many dead people in one place at just one time.
To be kind of launched into the middle of a crash site of a huge passenger plane, it just blew both of our minds.
This was such a catastrophic incident that as the plane broke up, people here say that they could see bodies literally dropping from the skies.
I was filming Stuart in the what was the wing section and where the engines are. You could smell bodies, you could smell death.
You saw parts of aircraft strewn around the countryside, and then obviously people's personal effects. And then you pull up actually to the main crash site itself, which is enormous. They're still pulling bodies out of the crash site.
I mean, none of it seemed real. It didn't seem like a real situation to be in at all.
There we were, stood right on the middle of the main crash site. There were probably 20, 30 bodies stretching ahead of us. It was horrendous.
The debris field, I think is the term they used, was very large. We were at one end of the debris field, but it went back a long, long way. And the whole way through fields after fields and roads after roads, bodies, just everywhere you look.
The access to the crash zone was absolutely incredible. It wouldn't happen in the UK or anywhere else in the Western world. But there we were, right on the edge of this major crash site where a passenger jet had fallen from the sky.
There was no order whatsoever. There were military there, but there was no one actually preventing us from doing anything. It's just totally surreal.
Nothing was cordoned off. Everything could be accessed and seen, and genuinely you were standing in amongst this wreckage.
We walked through a bit of a track out into the field itself, and suddenly it opened up into an area where all the crops were flattened. There ahead of us basically was the front part of the aircraft. It was very obviously the cockpit and the business class section. You could see the pilot seats, you could see all the avionics, you could see cables and control panels just strewn everywhere. There was paperwork, there was flight logs and briefcases with the details of that day's flight on it. All these items that made the thing incredibly human.
It was so poignant and so sad. In the wreckage, you saw the actual handwritten note that the captain would have said over the tannoy.
It was like, what do we do? I had never seen anything like it. On the hands of the wheel of the, in the cockpit with the hands of the guy who had been flying the plane. And we did a piece of camera, and Pete says, we can't use it. I said, why? He says, that hand, it's still on the wheel.
I've never been in a situation like this before. You know, I've been in war zones many times, and I've been to smaller plane crashes, but I've never been to a large plane crash in the middle of a war zone.
Behind me I can hear, you won't be able to hear it, but there's a Grad missile launcher that has been firing pretty much every 10 minutes for the last few hours. There was a battle taking place a few kilometres away. We were in the middle of a war. There was fighting going on all around us while we were looking at this huge gravesite. All you could hear was the boom of artillery.
I must confess, I really wasn't thinking about the danger aspects of it. I wasn't thinking about it being an active, pretty hairy war zone.
In the area of the crash, there were sunflower fields and cornfields, and locals had effectively put a white flag on a stick marking a body or part of a body.
I remember seeing that local people had come from nearby towns and villages. There was a group of coal miners who'd come to help with the recovery effort.
We pulled up at a field where we saw a lot of activity, and basically it was people doing a long line search through the crops. And it was quite extraordinary. It was a beautiful picture, if you like, because the crops are so pretty in the sunlight. But you know that they're actually looking for bodies. And every time they found a body, they'd put a stick in the ground with a little white piece of material on it, and that would mark the body. That will stay with me.
It took a really long time for the repatriation to get underway. First they had to account for all of the victims and then transport them from the crash site to Ukrainian-friendly territory, and that was where they were going to be flown on their final journey home.
This was the first time that the bodies were actually dealt with any sort of dignity. They were handed over, and then everything kind of slowed down, and the bodies were calmly loaded onto the back of the transport planes. It was almost like a military funeral. Very, very respectful.
When a plane full of women, men, children, who are probably just going on holiday, get shot out of the sky by a missile, that should not have happened. I think that was really difficult to process, and I really hope I don't ever have to cover a story like that again.
Why they would want to shoot a passenger jet down, I do not know. The only thing I can think is that it was unintentional. Military jets and helicopters have been shot down, but why they would suddenly then want to start targeting a passenger jet, I just don't understand.
There was a major investigation, and that found that the missile system used to shoot down the airliner had come from Russia. But of course the Russians deny that, and the whole thing just goes on and on.
It was only when you started to think about the families and everything that they'd gone through. It's quite distressing.
My sympathy would go to obviously the families who have not got closure yet. I just hope that comes soon.
That's it from my team in Myanmar and our crews around the world. Thanks for watching.
So